This issue's book is The Box: How the Shipping Container Made the World Smaller and the World Economy. You might be wondering, isn't a container just a big metal box? It's not exactly high-tech. How could it have changed the world? Because it directly enabled the global division of labor. Take the iPhone, for example. Its core components come from the United States, the camera and chips are produced in Japan and South Korea, the battery is made by a Chinese manufacturer, and finally, workers at Foxconn assemble it all. You might be familiar with this process, but have you ever considered that it's the shipping container, by saving countless hours of handling and dramatically cutting logistics costs, that makes all of this possible? Without the container, transportation costs would be unimaginably high. Forget international sea freight, even shipping goods across half a country would be prohibitively expensive. For a product sold at $100, 25 of that might have gone to shipping. But with the container, humanity's cargo transport costs have been reduced by over 90%, creating the fertile ground for global specialization and allowing resources to flow and be allocated efficiently on a worldwide scale. Americans can eat beef from Brazil, Europeans can use phones made in China, and China itself joined the global value chain through this process. When you look at it this way, you realize the container is far more than just a metal box. It has reshaped the world's economic and political landscape and, to a great extent, redrawn the map of global wealth. The book's author, Mark Levinson, is a renowned American economist and best-selling writer. Starting with the seemingly unremarkable container, he unveils a magnificent business miracle for us. Next, I will interpret this book for you in two parts. First, how was the container invented? You will see that a single breakthrough isn't innovation, systemic innovation is the real revolution. Second, how was the container promoted globally? We will discover that technological complexity isn't the decisive factor for innovation application is key. Let us start with the first part. How was the container invented? The man who invented the container was Malcom McLean, an American hailed as the father of the container. But to be precise, he wasn't the first person to invent it. The container had existed for decades before McLean adopted it. You might find that odd. Why did a decades-old, low-tech object become a world-changing invention in McLean's hands? This is precisely where McLean's genius lay. His first job was as a truck driver, and he later went on to found his own freight company. He had an immense talent for business and knew that in a competitive market, cost control is king. Whoever has lower costs can offer more competitively priced products and services. McLean was a master at this. When other trucks were still running on gasoline, he had already converted his entire fleet to diesel. To save on fuel, he required his drivers to refuel only at designated stations to get discounts. Even more incredibly, the side panels of his company's trucks weren't smooth but corrugated, because he had heard this shape could reduce wind resistance and thus save fuel. McLean was this type of shrewd, meticulous entrepreneur. By 1940, against the backdrop of World War II, domestic production and logistics in the U.S. were booming, and his transport company rode the wave. By the end of the war, McLean's company was one of the largest in the nation, with the third highest after-tax income in the industry. However, success also brought bottlenecks. The highways at the time were becoming increasingly congested, which was fatal for the transportation business. How could an entrepreneur who calculated costs down to wind resistance tolerate the losses from trucks being stuck in traffic for hours, or even days? So, McLean thought, why not just ship by sea? He planned to have the truck trailers loaded directly onto ships, to be picked up by another truck on the other side. Was this his innovation? Not really. Many companies had tried similar things, but only as scattered, one-off operations. McLean's vision went a step further. He wanted to build his own dedicated terminals. He later discovered that by loading the large metal boxes directly onto the ship, he could also stack them, allowing him to transport more at once. At this point, the prototype of the container had emerged. But this still wasn't a true innovation, as the method of shipping with containers had existed for decades. So where did McLean's innovation truly lie? It was in his attempt to build a complete, integrated system for the first time. McLean deeply understood that the essence of the shipping industry is moving freight, not just sailing ships. To lower freight costs, you needed more than just tin boxes, you needed an entirely new method of handling cargo. This system had to encompass the port, the ship, the crane, the truck, and even the operational procedures of the shipper. Every link in the chain had to be transformed in a coordinated fashion. This systemic insight was far ahead of anyone else of his time. Therefore, his contribution wasn't just in using the container, but in fundamentally changing the operating model of the freight industry. After setting up this system, McLean conducted a cost comparison experiment. Take shipping beer, for example. Using the traditional break bulk method, loading from the factory onto a truck, unloading at the docks, reloading onto a ship, then unloading and reloading onto a truck at the destination, the cost per ton was as high as $4. But by using containers, which were packed at the brewery and shipped directly to the destination port, the cost was a mere 20 cents. That's a 95% saving in shipping costs. A massive new era of opportunity in shipping had arrived. To fully enter the maritime shipping industry, McLean decided to acquire the parent company of a major shipping line, hoping to monopolize shipping on the Atlantic. His ambition was enormous, but he faced a growing number of problems. Financing difficulties, frequent equipment failures, and even people stealing the containers to use as houses. Simply put, while his own system was efficient, the surrounding societal infrastructure hadn't caught up. In its early days, McLean's company was actually losing money. He could only hang on through meticulous cost-cutting while continuously improving his system. The turning point finally came. Around 1967, the Vietnam War escalated, and the U.S. military needed to transport vast quantities of material from the homeland to Asia. War demands efficiency. After optimizing its transport plans, the U.S. government found the best way to use containers, known as the 3 Cs. One container, one commodity, one consignee. This proved to be the most efficient method. McLean's opportunity had come. The company that had been losing money the year before suddenly secured a $450 million contract from the Department of Defense. The golden age of the container had truly begun. This process shows us that the journey from an innovative product's birth to its widespread adoption is often a long one. The first person to take the plunge may not survive to see the industry's boom. McLean was lucky, but the hardships he endured are a reflection of the struggles of countless innovators. This also answers our initial question. Why did a simple metal box that had been around for years only become a new invention in McLean's hands? Because in the real world, a new invention is essentially a systemic project. A product's value isn't determined by what it is, but by how it is used. For a highly automated, low-cost, low-complexity cargo transport system, the container is the core, but it is just one piece of the puzzle. The real difficulty lies in building that system and making it run smoothly. McLean was the first to see this path, the first to act on it, and the one who ultimately succeeded. Without him, the container might have remained just an ordinary metal box. That is why he is revered as the inventor of the container. We just discussed how McLean built an entire container system for his shipping business. So, did this new invention enjoy a smooth and easy rollout from there? Far from it. The story of the container was just beginning. Like all great innovations, it stirred the fate of everyone in the industry with a force and consequence that far exceeded anyone's imagination. Next, let's talk about the subsequent evolution of the container and the tremendous impact it had on the world. After years of struggle, McLean finally turned a profit. His company boasted 31 container ships, and its revenues soared. The shipping industry became a hot sector overnight, with competitors flocking in. Every time a new route was opened, several rivals would immediately jump in. On the busiest international routes, shipping capacity multiplied 14-fold in just 6 years. In 1966, only a small number of containers moved between the US and Europe. By 1974, the annual volume had surpassed 1 million. Capacity grew far faster than demand, and the industry inevitably erupted into a price war. This is nothing new in business, but the price war in container shipping was particularly brutal. In the past, if a shipowner found business slow, they could let a ship sit idle for a few days at a low cost. But container ships were different. Their costs were extremely high even when docked. Companies had relied on loans for expansion. The ships, containers, and port facilities were all bought with borrowed money, and interest had to be paid even if they were sitting idle. Compounded by fierce competition and soaring oil prices, the entire maritime pricing system quickly collapsed, and companies suffered heavy losses. The Financial Times even declared, "The revolutionary impact of containerization is nearing its end." But author Mark Levinson says the Financial Times was wrong. The revolution brought by the container had just begun. These effects can be summarized in 3 areas. It brought industrial transformation to the shipping industry, it changed the destiny of its workers, and it profoundly altered the geopolitical and economic landscape of the entire world. First, the container brought industrial transformation to shipping. Traditional economic theory, from David Ricardo onward, has habitually assumed transportation costs to be zero. It wasn't until the 1990s that this issue gained the attention of mainstream economists. Ricardo once used the example of Portuguese wine and English cloth to explain how the two countries could trade by leveraging their respective cost advantages. This is theoretically sound, but practically difficult. If transport costs are too high, trade cannot happen. Before 1956, freight costs were indeed extremely high. Shipping goods by sea was an incredibly complex undertaking. Cargo had to be moved piece by piece from a factory onto a truck, then taken to the docks to be unloaded, registered, and stored in a transit shed. When the ship was ready, the cargo was counted again and loaded onto the vessel by dock workers. The entire process left the docks in a chaotic mess, strewn with boxes and debris. To cut costs, factories had to be built clustered around the ports, and workers and related professionals also wanted to live nearby. The result was that the entire port area became incredibly congested, and the shipping industry appeared slow, bloated, and inefficient. For example, at the time, it cost a pharmaceutical company $2,400 to transport a truckload of medicine from the American Midwest to a city in inland Europe. This money was consumed by trucking, port warehousing, shipping lines, insurance companies, and various other stages, with nearly half of the cost being wasted at the port. But the arrival of the container changed everything. Its core principles were standardization and systemization. All shipping companies worldwide use compatible container sizes, allowing them to be freely loaded and unloaded by trucks, trains, ports, and ships. Handling is done mainly by cranes, and each container holds only one type of product, eliminating the hassle of sorting. This led to a massive boost in efficiency and a sharp drop in costs. With increased efficiency, factories no longer needed to be built around ports, and workers didn't have to live crowded nearby. The entire freight transport industry transformed from a sluggish, inefficient state to a highly efficient, modern operation. This was the immense change brought by the container. Second, the container dramatically changed the destinies of people working in the shipping industry. A transformation in transport processes inevitably brings a seismic shift in the working conditions of its employees, especially longshoremen. Previously, the life of a dock worker was incredibly harsh. They had to manually haul cargo onto ship's sacks weighing dozens of pounds, heavy steel ingots, metal equipment, and enormous logs. By the end of the day, they were too exhausted to stand up straight. This purely physical labor was not only grueling and low-paying but also lacked social status. They lived in slums clustered around the docks, and their work was temporary, which fostered a unique and very tight-knit community culture. For the workers, solidarity was a good thing, a way to fight exploitation by the bosses. But this same solidarity also once stood in the way of innovations like the container. In the eyes of the dock workers, the arrival of the container was no different from stealing their jobs. Although the work was hard and exhausting, it was not easy to come by. Every morning, workers had to compete for jobs, sometimes even bribing foremen to get work. Union leaders, as vested interests, naturally did everything they could to resist the capitalists' innovations. Earlier, some had tried using pallets, large wooden trays to centralize cargo and reduce costs, but the dock workers refused. They would intentionally break up the pallets after the goods arrived, forcing workers to move items piece by piece onto the ship, rendering the tool useless. Consequently, the initial rollout of the container also met with huge resistance. In the end, however, the trend of mechanization was unstoppable. The dockworkers switched to negotiating with the capitalists, demanding a share of the profits from the innovation, and this barrier was finally broken. Of course, mechanization also created many new jobs. Manual hauling was replaced by skilled technical work operating machinery, and many longshoremen went on to lead more dignified lives. The old division of labor was replaced, and a new one was created, an inevitable outcome of technological change. Finally, the container changed the world's economic and geopolitical landscape, greatly accelerating globalization. Globalization is not a new concept. The ancient Silk Road was an early form of it. But back then, only light, luxury goods like silk and porcelain could be transported. After the container became widespread, transport costs plummeted, making it possible for bulk commodities to be traded worldwide. This fundamentally changed the economic structure of many countries. Nations with few natural resources like Japan and Singapore could easily import raw materials and use their own labor for processing. These coastal nations rose largely on the power of globalization. Our own country, China, is also a huge beneficiary of this global division of labor. For manufacturing, the container introduced a completely new mode of production. Toyota created the famous just-in-time model. Many of the raw materials they needed were transported directly to the factory by suppliers in trucks. The containers were opened, and the contents went straight to the production line, dramatically increasing operational efficiency and fundamentally changing the production model. This is one of the key reasons Toyota gained such a strong competitive edge in the global market. The container made international shipping both cheap and secure, effectively removing the hidden tariff of freight costs. This encouraged manufacturers in one country to source cheaper raw materials globally, turning the entire planet into one giant factory with nations collaborating in a division of labor. The manufacturers or retailers at the top of this chain became the key nodes of the entire system. Think of a Barbie doll. The molds to make it come from Japan and Europe, its hair from Japan, its plastic body from Taiwan, and finally, it's dressed and assembled in a factory in mainland China. From there, it is sold all over the world. Countless products globally have formed their own complex supply chains because of the container. McLean could never have imagined that his invention would change the fate of thousands of dockworkers and even reshape global industrial specialization. This is another key characteristic of innovative products. Once released, their social impact often far exceeds the original vision. At this point, we have reviewed the entire journey of the shipping container from its invention to its mass adoption and analyzed its profound impact on the industry and the world. Finally, I will share a few key takeaways from this history. I have summarized 4 key lessons from this story. First, the level of technical complexity is not the decisive factor in changing productivity. The container is a simple technology, but its impact has been immeasurable. Therefore, the key to innovation is not what a product is, but how it is used. There's a saying in the innovation world, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. The inventors of many products that have had a huge impact, even changing the world, were not the first to create them. Take the smartphone before Steve Jobs. Nokia had been exploring it for years. For many great inventions, the technology itself already existed, but it was only after being discovered, improved, and promoted by someone from another field that it became a world-changing product. We are never short of great innovations around us. What we lack are the eyes to see them. Second, true disruptive innovation is not a single breakthrough but a systemic project. It requires the surrounding infrastructure to catch up in sync to realize its full potential. More than a decade passed between McLean's first use of a container and its widespread adoption by the industry. He overcame countless difficulties, endured a long and painful process, and was even on the brink of bankruptcy. Innovation in the real world is often like this. For example, when the internet first appeared, Alibaba was not the first e-commerce company, but many pioneers didn't survive to see the era of widespread internet access, convenient payments, and faster network speeds. A single innovation rarely leads to a major breakthrough. Only systemic innovation can have a disruptive impact. Third, the impact of an innovative product is difficult to predict in its early stages. McLean couldn't have imagined that his system would change the landscape of world trade, nor that it would influence the manufacturing models of countries like Japan and China. Many innovations have a destructive force on seemingly unrelated fields. For instance, E-commerce hit brick and mortar retail after smartphones became popular. Sales of chewing gum at supermarket checkouts actually declined because people were busy on their phones while waiting in line. Innovation in any industry could be your opportunity or your crisis. Therefore, while focusing on our own industry, we must also keep a close eye on innovations in others to avoid being left behind by the times. Fourth, a great innovator, regardless of success or failure, will be remembered by the entire industry for their contributions. Every pioneer exploring a new field faces immense risks and uncertainties. McLean later sold his shipping company, and several subsequent entrepreneurial ventures failed. He ended his life deep in debt and bankrupt. Nevertheless, the shipping industry still honors him as the father of the container. When he passed away, container ships all over the world sounded their horns in unison, paying him the highest tribute. For an innovator, as long as they have contributed to the progress of their industry, they deserve our respect, regardless of their personal outcome. That's all for this issue's audio summary. Congratulations on finishing another book.